So, good afternoon to all here and a very warm welcome to today's webinar. I have to say I'm both delighted and privileged to introduce Kamala Mukunda, who's going to be taking today's session. Kamala has been an educator for several years, primarily at the Center for Learning, a small alternative school on the outskirts of Bangalore. She has written extensively on her various interests to do with education and the learning process, including two remarkable books, uh, both titled What Did You Ask at School Today? And both of which she calls Handbooks of Child Learning. So Kamala will be speaking to us for about 45 minutes or perhaps a little more. And after that, till around 5 o'clock, we'll have time to ask her questions. If you have any questions you'd like to ask, please do type them in the Q&A, and we'll take the questions up later. So welcome again, and thank you, Kamala, for joining us today. So over to you.
Thank you, Siddhartha and KFI for giving me this opportunity. I'm really honored, and I hope that I can share something that will be of interest to most of our listeners. I'll start with a slide sharing, and do let me know if it doesn't proceed.
Yeah, sure.
So the topic that I thought I would like to share on, and I've been thinking about it for several months now, is about psychological movements of comparison in learning spaces. And we all here know the feeling of comparing yourself with another person, whether favorably or unfavorably. We have felt less than or sometimes more than someone else, and the feeling has troubled us either way. Perhaps you've also noticed that you're more likely to compare in such a way that you feel less than someone else. It's something called upward comparison. It's usually guaranteed to ruin your mood. Now, if you're an educator or a parent or a grandparent, you may have compared one child with another. And you may even have fallen into the trap of using comparison as a tool to make the child do what you want. Today, I'm going to share with you my thoughts about this very interesting habit that we have and also its damaging consequences. And I will also share with you what I have learned from listening to Krishnamurti speaking on this topic. I feel that beyond just the negative consequences of comparison for oneself, this psychological movement actually reveals something very interesting about the way the self is constructed, and that's a very good reason to explore comparison. So let me begin with some simple observations. Comparison begins from birth itself. Even before the baby is aware of any of this, her parents are comparing her with other babies, right? Oh no, my baby is not walking yet, that one is. Or why doesn't my baby go easily to others? That one is going so easily. We're so troubled by the comparisons as parents. But the baby is as yet blissfully unaware of all this, progressing on her own timetable, learning truly at her own pace. She doesn't care that, for example, she's not yet eating solid foods. She's already 12 months old. Now, I don't know when it comes into the child's awareness that they are actually being compared with others. Sometimes the adults around make comparative comments, ranging from subtle to gross, like, your brother's so helpful. Why can't you be like him? So hurtful, so damaging that moment must be to sense the disappointment that you evoke in the adult. Surely the adult could simply say, come, I need your help. You see, then at some point, the child on his own begins to notice differences between himself and others. Some differences don't matter much, but many do. And as he grows older, these things become increasingly important in a comparative sense. Possessions, the kinds of clothes he wears, the kinds of accessories he has, his bag, the car, the family car, and so many things. Right? Then appearance, thin, dark, tall, short. Abilities, am I good at studies? Am I good at sports? Am I good at music? And social success. Am I popular? Do I have friends? Quickly, these comparisons lead to a sense of inadequacy. They can lead to a sense of inadequacy, which can be very painful. By the very definition of comparative measurement, there can only be a handful of children for which such comparison leads to feelings of happiness or apparent happiness. This kind of well being is shaky because it is dependent on coming out better in comparison. That's not a stable situation. One can always compare with someone better and feel inadequate once again. In fact, this is the way it often goes. There is an endless striving, an endless dissatisfaction with oneself. And I'm still talking just about children. The idea of striving towards something better is taken very positively in society and in education. You are told you must strive to become better, never be satisfied. This is the narrative that we've all bought into at some level. In fact, questioning this narrative of striving, it seems it's unthinkable, almost as bad as atheism must sound to a believer in God. And in educational systems around the world, the school leverages these narratives and feelings and amplifies them. In fact, schools elevate these feelings into widely accepted practices that are, in fact, harmful for children and the learning process. Comparison is the tool that schools use to set learners against each other, in competition with each other. Just think about it. There can be so much joy in learning together with peers. I've been a teacher for many, many years, actually, and I can say that the social element of learning in a group is just exhilarating, both for the students and for me. I don't use comparison as a tool at all in the classroom. And this allows the culture of the classroom to be cooperative and allows for collaborative learning. It almost, it often feels like there's just one mind learning. But unfortunately, in most schools around the world, this potential for collaborative learning and enjoyment is destroyed because children are explicitly compared to each other, either in words, like I shared earlier, or in the way competition is set up or favoritism among teachers for their students, and the way that rewards are used. So classroom learning is assessed through comparison. I remember that as a student, my teacher would sort the answer papers in order according to the marks obtained. And then he would read the names in order so that we would have to walk up to his table one by one to take our papers in the order of our scores from lowest to highest. This was in college, by the way. And then behavior is also assessed through comparison. Even earlier in my childhood, my school would award a ribbon of a certain color to students each month. This too was a public affair. We would stand in a line side by side, and the name of each child was called out one by one. Each child was made to take a certain number of steps forward, depending on the color of the ribbon that they deserved that month. Gold was 3 steps, blue 2 steps, brown 1 step, and of course, no ribbon, no steps. And since this wasn't tied to performance on tests and exams, I'm trying to remember now what determined who got which ribbon. I think it had to do with the subjective, comparative judgment that our teachers made as to how good we'd been that month. The feeling of knowing that you weren't a good girl. So much pain, so much sorrow, caused by a belief that comparison will motivate us to match up and do better. But the pain of not matching up, of not measuring up, of inadequacy, it interferes with learning of any kind. It can make us give up. We may lose interest in learning. We may lose interest, confidence in taking on a challenging task. On the other side of the coin, the feeling that I'm rather better than others is kind of interesting. You might think that it leads to a sense of confidence and self-sufficiency and greater mastery. But uneasy lies the head, isn't it? To measure one's learning against someone else's is inherently anxiety-provoking, even when one seems to be better than. It's uncomfortable. I had a friend in school who always came first, as we used to say. What anxiety she experienced trying to hold on to that position. So coming out of systems like this years later, when I was introduced to Krishnamurti's writing about education, I was struck by the truth that he wrote. I have, worked and taught at a Krishnamurti-inspired school for many, many years now, and I have seen that it is eminently possible to create a non-comparative learning culture at school. Now, Krishnamurti wrote letters to the schools that he had started in India and abroad regularly over a period of a few years. And in one of these letters, he took up the question of comparison, pointed out how it's a form of violence and so on. And I would like to read this one together with you. I will be leaving out one paragraph because of time considerations. I apologize for that. The name of the book is The Whole Movement of Life is Learning. It has many, many chapters. This is how it begins. One is apt to forget or disregard the responsibility of the educator to bring about a new generation of human beings who are psychologically, inwardly free of miseries, anxieties, and travail. It is a sacred responsibility not to be easily set aside for one's own ambitions, status, or power. If the educator feels such a responsibility, the greatness of it, and the depth and beauty of that responsibility, he will find the capacity to instruct and to sustain his own energy. The quote continues, "When you read this, please give your total attention and feel the urgency and intensity of this responsibility. Please do not make it into an abstraction, an idea, but rather observe the actual fact, the actual happening in the reading of this." And he goes on, "Almost all human beings in their lives desire power and wealth. When there is wealth, there's a sense of freedom and pleasure is pursued. The desire for power seems to be an instinct which expresses itself in many ways. It is in the priest, the guru, the husband, or the wife, or in the action of one student towards another. The desire to dominate or to submit is one of the conditions of mankind, probably inherited from the animals. This aggressiveness and the yielding to it pervert all relationships throughout life. And this has been the pattern from the beginning of time. Humanity has accepted it as a natural way of life with all the conflicts and miseries it brings." And he goes on, basically, measurement is involved in it. The more and the less, the greater and the smaller, which is essentially comparison. One is always comparing oneself with another, comparing one painting with another. There is comparison between the greater power and the lesser, between the timid and the aggressive. This constant measurement of power, position, wealth begins almost at birth and continues throughout life. It continues, "This is encouraged in schools, colleges, and universities. Their whole system of gradation is this giving comparative value to knowledge. When A is compared to B, who is clever, bright, assertive, that very comparison destroys A. And this destruction takes the form of competition, of imitation of, and conformity to the patterns set by B. And this breeds, consciously or unconsciously, antagonism, jealousy, anxiety, and even fear. And this becomes the condition in which A lives for the rest of his life, always measuring, always comparing, psychologically and physically. It continues, this comparison is one of the many aspects of violence. The word more is always comparative, as is the word better. The question is, can the educator put aside all comparison, all measurement in his teaching? Can he take the student as he is, not as what he should be, and not make judgments based on comparative evaluations? It is only when there is comparison between the one called clever and the one called dull that there is a quality such as dullness. He continues, we set certain standards which are based on measurement, and those who do not come up to them are considered deficient. When the educator puts aside comparison and measurement, then he is concerned with the student as he is. And his relationship with the student is direct, totally different. This is really very important to understand. Love is not comparative, it has no measurement. And he ends, comparison and measurement are ways of the intellect. This is divisive. When this is understood, basically, not the verbal meaning, but the actual truth of it, the relationship of teacher and student undergoes a radical change. The ultimate tests of measurement are examinations accompanied by fear and anxieties which deeply affect the future life of the student. The whole atmosphere of a school undergoes a change when there is no sense of competition and comparison. That's the end of that letter. Now, in the schools that were started by Krishnamurti and in those inspired by his questions, such as the school I work in, purposeful steps have been taken to remove the sense of comparison and competition, at least from a systemic point of view. So, for example, in our school, there are no tests, no exams, no grading, no comparative evaluation at all until the board exams, which take place once at age 15 and again at age 18. So teachers do not make statements to students that are comparative in nature. Be like her, do like him, he is better, and so on. We're also a small enough school that everyone in a group can participate in all activities. I mean, in the sense that we don't have to select some students only to be part of theater, music, sports. In all these ways, a school culture that robs comparison of its sting can be and has been created. The result is indeed a different school atmosphere than in traditional schools where, comparison and competition are the very lifeblood of education. At our schools, we are looking to build a confidence in the ability to learn, this being something that needs no external recognition as such. Everyone can learn and learn in different areas. And there is no need to hold up a standard for comparative evaluation in order for learning to happen. So, when Krishnamurti asked in the letter, can the educator put aside all comparison, all measurement in his teaching? I would suggest that it is possible. But, and there's a but here, you see, I am under no illusion that creating such a space has wiped out the habit of the mind to compare. Let me explain. I am not blind to the differences among my students. As a teacher, I notice that this one has deeper understanding and that one is more restless and another one is more hardworking. And as students, they also notice many differences among themselves. How come I didn't get that answer? They may think, right? Oh, she's so much faster than me. She's on page 27, I'm on page 12. Or he writes more neatly than me. Or how come I'm explaining to him all the time and he's never explaining to me? These things are noticed. It seems inevitable to notice differences. But I think that such noticing can be harmless. I'm not sure. I think so. There is so much diversity in life. I mean, between two birds, two flowers, two trees, one cannot but help notice differences everywhere. A lot of this noticing, can it not be simple, harmless comparison? Well, students tell us, and indeed it is clear for us to see, that comparison still haunts them. And in fact, it haunts us teachers as well. So, thought works in subtle ways. And we often fall prey to what I like to call the consolation prize trap. The mind, in its fear of being inadequate, looks for the consolation prize, the comparison in which I can come out on top. We do this with children quite a bit. If a child is struggling with something, a parent or even a teacher who cares about the child may feel like increasing his sense of self-worth. So, because we are afraid to allow the child, I think, to simply accept himself as he is, we fear he will be scarred. So, either we say, come on, you can do it. You can do anything. Don't give up. Or we find some alternative activity, something else he's good at, and we build his self-esteem through that. That's what I call the consolation prize trap. Subtly, the same movements are present in us adults. Comparison shows up in our work as teachers. Differences among a group of colleagues actually makes things happen, makes things possible. I'll explain. I work in a teacher-run school. Now, I'm good at some tasks, like I'm good at planning. And then another colleague of mine is good at parenting in the hostel. And yet another colleague is really good at teaching sports. Someone else is good at art, right? And all together, because of these differences, we are able to run the school well. And yet these very differences can stick sometimes in the throat and cause envy or hurt. If a group of students compares my teaching with their previous math teacher, can cause pain. If I find it difficult to express myself in parent meetings, but I find my colleague very articulate, I feel inadequate. And here too, the mind quickly brings out the consolation prizes. So what if I'm not as good as her in the classroom? I'm better on the sports field. Ah, that's a comfort. That is where I will build myself. So when Krishnamurti asks, which he does, is it possible to live without any sense of comparison? This is a much harder question. The habit of comparison seems very strong, even in the face of radical changes in school culture, like I have outlined. Now, Krishnamurti would often say that comparing one piece of cloth with another or comparing one car with another, it's a simple and necessary matter, right? But only when comparison turns to the self does it become violence. So this begs the question, well then, is comparison such an ingrained habit that we cannot switch it off and on will? Can we switch it off and on when it makes sense? Earlier, I was talking about, how from a young age we learn to compare ourselves with others, maybe because the adults around us do it. But in fact, there is something else happening here. Interestingly, comparison is a much deeper, in fact, an innate phenomenon. It is the way that the brain makes judgments of all kinds. You might have seen this famous Ebbinghaus illusion. You can demonstrate it for yourself with this basic perception of size. Even though our eyes are taking in the same size orange circle, the brain perceives size in a relative manner in comparison to the circles around it. If you don't believe that They are the same size. You have to do some complicated covering up of your screen to convince yourself. They are the same. And another example in the world of color, it's a beautiful one. The color around the A and around the B are exactly, it's the same color. This one is easy to see. You just put 2 fingers on your screen to cover the joint between the A and B. And you will see that A and B are exactly the same color. Let's give you a minute to do that. Now, why would the brain have evolved this way of perceiving the world? Right? Why not? Why do we not see things simply and exactly as they are? It turns out that comparison is useful perceptually to account for changing contexts like light and movement, etc. As a simple example, if one object is moving in comparison to another, this tells us important information about distance. This basic comparative movement of the mind is very old in our evolutionary past. It's ingrained as a way of making judgments about one thing by looking for similarity and differences compared to another thing. Now, this seems perfectly intelligent when it comes to our perceptions and judgments of properties of the material world. But now we also perceive and judge aspects of ourselves and other people's other selves, qualities and properties which are rather elusive. The self is not a material object whose properties can be easily perceived. These perceptions and the judgments that follow, though, they matter tremendously to us. That a tree is further from me than a house, it's important as I navigate the physical world if I want to climb the tree before I get into the house. But that I am less talented musically than my friend is important to me as I navigate the social world. So this is called social comparison, and it is very emotional. The stakes seem to be very high. Who I am is determined by these comparisons, and who I am is terribly important to me. It's perhaps more important than anything else in the world to me. So I wonder, can this strong feeling be questioned? Most of the time, we're content not to question it. In fact, we take it as given. We take it as inevitable. By this, I mean, we take for granted that we have a self. It has properties. These properties can be measured through comparison. And from that position, or that set of assumptions, we're interested to learn more about social comparison. So I decided to look up the scientific and popular literature to see if I don't question this whole self and so on, what will I learn about social comparison? And this is what I found. Social comparison is a normal behavior strategy where we seek to better understand our status relating to ability, opinion, emotional reaction, and more by comparing ourselves to other people. Social comparison can be useful because it provides us with a way to determine if we are on track. But it can also be extremely harmful and result in negative thoughts and behaviors. So, like so many human traits and habits, when you research it a little bit, you are told that A, it is normal, it's natural, and B, it has both advantages and disadvantages. Nowadays, I reach this point in so many conversations, and so much self-improvement literature is full of this. You can substitute for the word comparison almost anything: hurt, jealousy, aggression, greed, loneliness, and you will be told the idea is the same. X, whatever, is normal, natural. It has both advantages and disadvantages. And of course, here is how to cope with it. Here's how you manage it better to minimize the disadvantages. Now, this approach to self-understanding leaves me leaves me feeling very dissatisfied. I do hope that, by natural, we do not mean inevitable. The dangerous consequences of so many so-called natural human traits are all around us to see. I mean, you could choose anything. Take identification with one's tribe or community or nation, the sense of us and them, right? Or the need and greed to consume endlessly. These may be natural in that they have very old adaptive roots. But if we assume that natural means implies inevitable in a deterministic kind of way, then we are doomed to only manage and control and suppress these destructive habits. Such approaches to self-understanding and social control have actually not worked, as is easily visible all around us. So at this point, Krishnamurti's radical insights are like a splash of ice-cold water, both invigorating and somewhat disorienting at the same time. He really helps you understand comparison in a much more subtle and deep way, revealing the nature of the self and what lies beneath all our opinions, identities, memories, properties. He shows that it's actually connected to the basic question, who am I? And then he also shows where fear comes into the picture. I'm sharing below a few quotes extracted from various sources by Krishnamurti. I have extracted and juxtaposed them for the purpose of this talk. I apologize for that because it is really better to read the original entire essay or the entire talk. I'll begin with something from a book called Beginnings of Learning. Krishnamurti asks, why do you compare? What is the need of measurement? Is it an escape from yourself, from your own shallowness, emptiness, and insufficiency? Then in another book, Urgency of Change, he asks, can the mind face and live with this emptiness and not escape in any direction? Any movement away from this emptiness is an escape. And this flight away from something, away from what is fear. Fear is flight away from something. What is not the fear. It's the flight which is the fear. This will drive you mad, not the emptiness itself. So what is this emptiness, this loneliness? How does it come about? Surely it comes through comparison and measurement, doesn't it? And he continues, I compare myself with the saint, the master, the great musician, the man who knows, the man who has arrived. In this comparison, I find myself wanting and insufficient. I have no talent. I am inferior. I have not realized. I am not, and that man is. So, out of measurement and comparison comes the enormous cavity of emptiness and nothingness. And the flight from this cavity is fear. And the fear stops us from understanding this bottomless pit. It is a neurosis which feeds upon itself. This cavity of emptiness that he talks about, this cavity of emptiness that he talks about, I understand it as being both the cause and effect of my habit of comparing. In response to some emptiness within, I measure myself against others. Maybe the hope is I will feel like a somebody, feel less empty. But measurement and comparison often result in my feeling worse, like a nobody. Then I'm back in the cavity of emptiness. I think we feel we can beat this problem someday by becoming somebody, by fulfilling ourselves in some way or other, and then we're back in the mess. As Krishnamurti says, it is a neurosis which feeds upon itself. And in the quote, Krishnamurti also brings in fear, that fear that drives my flight from the emptiness and drives me to compare, the fear that prevents us from resting or staying with that emptiness for even a little while to understand it. Now, apart from the personal suffering that comparison brings to each of us when it does, there is another important fact that Krishnamurti helps us see. He helps me to see the connection between my own need for fulfillment and the consequences for a planet of 8+ billion people, all striving to fulfill themselves. That is, examining and understanding the movement of comparison also helps, for me anyway, to illuminate the causes of suffering of other people. World crises stem from the fact that all human beings want to acquire status, experience, material possessions, all want to acquire as a way of fulfilling themselves. And in the urge to be somebody, identities are formed, groups are formed, we divide into an us and a them, conflict, war. So now I feel I'm really ready to question this idea of a self, this idea of a self that's with me all the time. From a very young age, I have been building myself, and so have you. We think of it as normal, inevitable. Yet, interestingly, for millennia, spiritual thinkers have said that the feeling of being a separate individual self is actually an illusion, that there is a me separate from a you is actually an illusion. And very interestingly, these spiritual insights are in striking agreement with the view coming from science. Just summarizing, but science tells us that the brain has many different networks, each doing a different job, all integrating to perform actions smoothly in the world. For instance, one network controls what we pay attention to, and it makes the final decision on how to respond based on integrating our memories and the external situation we find ourselves in. And another brain network accesses our autobiographical memories and spins stories of the past and the future. These are our daydreams, our dreams. These are all functions of a self, actually, as we would recognize them to be. But there is actually nothing that masterminds these functions. There is no central higher, network that runs it all. There is nothing in there to which all this is reporting. It feels like there is, but there really isn't. All these things are running on their own smoothly and in an integrated way. So really, who is this person whose qualities I am trying to measure? I think in contrast to these views, we seem to live our lives in a desperate attempt to be somebody, to be a separate and defined individual. In a talk in Hamburg in 1956, Krishnamurti puts it this way. He says, I do not know if you have noticed the constant effort that one is consciously or unconsciously making to express oneself, to be something, either socially, morally, or economically. This entails a great deal of striving. Our whole life is based on the everlasting struggle to arrive, to achieve, to become. The more we struggle, the more significant and exaggerated the self becomes, with all its limitations, fears, ambitions, frustrations. There must have been times when each one has asked themselves whether it's not possible to be totally without the self. And in another book called The First and Last Freedom, he says, by the self, I mean the idea, the memory, the conclusion, the experience, the various forms of nameable and unnameable intentions, the conscious endeavor to be or not to be, competition, the accumulated memory of the unconscious, the racial, the group, the individual, the clan, the whole of it, whether projected outwardly in action or projected spiritually as virtue. The whole process of that is the self. So when I put together for myself, what Krishnamurti said earlier about that emptiness and what he's saying here about the self, I wonder if the feeling of emptiness is actually a glimpse of the illusory nature of the self. The feeling of being nothing. The question, who am I, that has no ultimate answer. Now, it should be a breakthrough moment each time, but I don't seem to welcome this as insight. I seem to misunderstand it as, oh, no, I'm a nobody. And then I run away into a comfort zone of trying to be somebody, fulfill myself, my desires, my ambitions. I become a somebody who consumes work, food, entertainment, acknowledgement of others. But at other times, the glimpse of emptiness gives me actually a rush of relief, a sudden dropping away of all my preoccupations, insecurities, and worries, not one by one, but all at once. There is nothing in here to protect. At those times, I think that that glimpse of emptiness is some kind of a vast interconnected being. It's without me at the center. And Krishnamurti puts it this way. It's a book called Commentaries on Living. In book 1, he puts it like this. He says, you are nothing. You may have your name and title, your property and bank account. You may have power and be famous. But in spite of all these safeguards, you are as nothing. You may be totally unaware of this emptiness, this nothingness. Or you may simply not want to be aware of it. But it is there. Do what you will to avoid it. And he goes on, you are not related to it as a separate individual entity. You are not the observer watching it. Without you, the thinker, the observer, it is not. You and nothingness are one. You and nothingness are a joint phenomenon, not two separate processes. When there is the discovery, the experience of that nothingness as you, then fear completely drops away. So as I said earlier, beyond the seeking relief from personal suffering, I feel there is a very good reason to understand ourselves and our constant need for self-fulfillment and therefore comparison. Many of us are teachers today because we are disturbed by the suffering in the world. And we want to respond to this through the medium of education. And we feel, I think, that if children can be educated in a holistic way, then society itself will change. So when we see in the world a certain ruthlessness, a certain self-centeredness, do we see that it is just the magnified effect of the individual self-centeredness and the need to fulfill? Do I see that connection between why I became a teacher and the state of the world and this inside, this self inside? Again, here Krishnamurti says it very beautifully in a talk given in Sanand. He says, if the truth is that you are standing on the ground which is common to all mankind, and you feel totally responsible, then what is your action towards society, towards the world in which you are actually living? The world as it is now is full of violence. Suppose I realize that I am totally responsible. What is my action then? And he says, competitiveness between nations is destroying the world. The most powerful, the less powerful, and the less powerful trying to become more powerful, which is competition. Not only nationally, which is destroying the world, shall I, realizing that I am the rest of mankind and I am totally responsible, shall I be competitive? Please answer these questions. When I feel responsible for this, naturally, I cease to be competitive. Okay, so this exploration has become now doubly important for my life, for my work, for everything that matters to me. What to do with all these insights, very big insights into the habit of comparison, since I see them as having far-reaching implications. When I go back to my daily work at school, what can I do differently? What can I do? Uh, if I had to give some simple ideas, they would look like this. I'll start with the simple. First, I would say remove all institutional comparison, all school or teacher endorsed competition in learning spaces. Be assured, rest assured that motivation to learn will come from other sources. Strong sources such as curiosity, cooperation, the joy of understanding new things, and affection between teacher and student. Second, let us remove from our vocabulary completely words like, he's better, be like him, or let's see who finishes this page first. Third, let's try to make the school inclusive, an inclusive and participative space, not a space where everyone is vying for some privilege or other. Everyone in a class can take part in special events, not only a select few. However rational your process of selection, it's not worth it. Fourth, we can speak with children about their feelings around comparison, maybe from age 11 or 12 or so, when they are aware of these feelings within themselves. You see, if we have created a culture of, that's free of fear in the classroom, sorry, if we've created a culture free of fear in the classroom, such conversations can be very revealing. Children can be surprisingly honest with each other and with us. As they get older, the deeper questions that Krishnamurti has raised, like of being nothing, those questions can also be raised. But I just want to caution us, please don't expect that a young 16-year-old on the brink of entering the world and, discovering new and exciting identities for himself or herself, don't expect that they will jump with joy at the idea of being nothing. There is some resistance to some of these questions. Older students tend to, I have noticed, they instinctively align with popular ideas such as that comparison is only natural, it's normal, makes me feel good sometimes, it makes me feel bad sometimes. Feeling bad sometimes is unavoidable. Oh no, if I take these questions seriously, then I'll have to give up feeling good sometimes. All this does happen. All I can say is do keep at it with good humor. You never know when the value of these invaluable questions will be seen. And as colleagues, teachers in any school can sit together and go into the deeper questions of comparison and selfhood. Our school is actually an interesting case study because we are teacher run, we are flat, we're non-hierarchical. We have no ladders for teachers to climb. This removes a lot of unnecessary striving and strife. There are no promotions, whether from junior to middle to senior school, or from teacher to administrator, or from secretary to principal. There is nothing. In spite of this, we teachers sometimes experience the pain of comparison, the need to become somebody, even in a really small school. And we talk about it with each other. We're wondering, what are these ladders that we've set up inside ourselves? Where do they go? The school is a small, flat space, but the mind is vast and complicated. It doesn't follow the rules of a non-hierarchical setup. So regular conversations in the spirit of inquiry and dialogue, without answers, without conclusions, just explorations, are very important to working together. And these bring to us some curiosity and skepticism toward our habitual ways of being. And like the children, then, we are free to learn. A school environment is actually an amazing learning space for the teachers. It's a privilege in that sense. If we are not caught in the emotions of comparison and becoming better and different and better than, we can enjoy our work and our students and keep learning. This is a way to flourish. I really like that word flourish. Just means flower. It has no sense of comparison in it to me. So, Siddhartha, I'll end here. I've really spoken for a long time, I think. I look forward to some comments from all of you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kamala. That was such an extraordinarily rich presentation, looking at this whole issue at, I would say, multiple but closely integrated levels. And I'd like to invite uh, those who are attending the webinar to put in their questions in the Q&A. But meanwhile, maybe I'll just begin with one or two questions while we're waiting for questions from others. And let me just start with a very specific question related to something you had said quite early on in your presentation. And you were saying, when the classroom atmosphere, when the learning atmosphere is non-comparative, non-competitive, and is participatory, there's this sense that it feels as if there's one mind learning. I was struck by that phrase, and I was just wondering if you could throw a little light on it. I mean, I have a sense of it, it's very rich, but if you could perhaps illustrate it or explain it a bit, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, so one thing to understand about the classroom is that it is participatory. There's a lot of student contribution. It is a little chaotic. The classes are small, and that's why we can allow that. They speak a lot. They speak over each other. They speak over me a lot of the time. And I have to hold that energy quite diligently. But they often finish each other's sentences. They don't seem to own the answer to a question that, like, I'm speaking about a mathematics class now, for example. If a question is on the board, if somebody gives an idea, it really feels to me like they're not thinking that that's my idea. That's the first step. Then somebody else picks it up. Then somebody else either corrects it, somebody else finishes it. And this happens a lot of the time, almost all the time. I have joked with them. They are coming up for their exams. I used to tell them, I'm going to register all of you as one student. I actually say that to tell them, can you let somebody else speak to finish? It does feel like that in
Yeah.
many of our classes. They are not, they say what they say and they don't feel stuck to what they've said, either embarrassed or proud of it. It really feels like that.
Well, I mean, I guess a sort of connected question which arises is that we almost take it for granted that a school should also help each child uh, discover and strengthen his or her, abilities. In some sense, the whole schooling system is designed around developing what you might call the self, or let's say the illusion of the self, since you demonstrated that there's probably no such thing. So many people would argue that that's necessary, uh, because without it, who are you? And of course, you can answer that question at a very fundamental level by saying, of course, you are nothing.
Mm.
But that's no comfort to most children and probably most parents and perhaps several teachers as well.
Mm.
So do you find that because teachers have to work with parents and with children, so do you
Mm.
find that you are sometimes having to battle a kind of counter impulse that is focused on strengthening the self?
I think it might depend on the milieu in which you're running a school. If you are like I am working with urban middle to upper class children, yes, very much the narrative that you say is there. And especially the child is so precious at home, almost the center of the household. There's so much, even when we get applications for admission, the parents write about their child. My child is special. Everyone writes, my child is special. And he's so smart, she's so bright. Actually, they all are. I mean, I don't doubt it. But so that is one thing that not battle, but gently to work with the parents to understand that your child is one among many, and they're all very, very bright, very you know, sweet and special. I think that there are other milieus. I think I have friends working in tribal areas, for instance. I don't know, but I have a feeling that this may not be such a strong movement, that it is very much more collective. The culture is more collectivist, as they say, perhaps. They are not seeking um, to become somebody, to be outstanding in any way. No? But I think our children have this feeling that they have to be outstanding in some way. If not in the math class, then in the English class. Not in the English class, then on the sports field. I had a student say to me once, everyone in my class has a thing. I don't have a thing. And I just, what is that thing that you're talking about? The thing that I'm good at. So that becomes a pressure. But the earlier part of what you said, which is that it is our job to help this child find something where their energies and effort flows smoothly, right? Something in normal terms, we would say something you're good at. It is my responsibility to do that as well and to make sure that they feel confident in their learning in that area. That is very much a part of it. And I also as a learner, because I learned music at an older age, I could see the difference between learning, growing that skill and enjoying it, and the thoughts that would come that, oh, I am this person who is learning and growing. And it was very different. The two were very different from each other.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm tempted to keep questioning, but there are questions that have started coming in the chat. So let me
Okay.
first ask one that's related to what I just asked, which is how do the parents respond to this non-comparative setup? Don't they feel that a grading system is essential?
Yeah, so quite fortunately, in our admission process itself, we are very transparent about this. So the parents we get are already on this page with us. They are quite happy with this. They have no problem. The reports we write are all qualitative. Uh, Sometimes around 15 or age 18, the questions start to plague them because now they have to send their children out into the world where they will be compared with other applicants and they will. So sometimes it bothers them, it troubles them, but that's a reality. But during the school years, I have not encountered a parent saying, but tell me, is my child the best or better or the worst? They don't seem to.
Right. Yeah. In fact, sometimes this anxiety, even if it's not with parents at the time that children are in school,
Mm.
uh, we do have people sometimes concerned about how children will manage in a system outside school,
Yeah,
which is run very differently. But we'll come to that later if there's time. Let
sure.
me again go back to questions in the chat.
Mm.
Now, here's one. As human beings, we need to evolve, and it becomes inevitable to compare us to someone as a yardstick. In such a situation, how to derive motivation from within to evolve?
Mm. Yeah, it is the question. Uh, all I can say is that because I have taught for so long and have learned also, it is possible to be motivated to learn and to teach without. So there are sometimes children in our school who have special learning difficulties, specific learning difficulties. And in those cases, what we may try and teach them one-on-one, because in the classroom it's a little difficult for them to pick up, especially if it's chaotic. I think in those learning spaces, the whole energy is going to understanding, explaining, wherever the level is, getting some insight and seeing that the growing understanding. There is absolutely no need to say you need to finish this by this time unless you have an exam at the end of it, right? Those are really the only benchmarks. That is the only benchmark that I accept as a teacher. If this child needs to get certification, okay, then I will use that as a benchmark to say, have you reached that? Are you going towards that? But until that age or that moment, in all other forms of learning, if there is no external requirement, then I don't need to bring it. I mean, that's all I can say, that there is learning, it is happening. There is something in the brain which has evolved, which is like that the rush of joy at understanding something. And any child will do that. Ah, I got it. Not just the
Yeah,
ones who get it first or get it best no, everyone has that moment. I'm just
right.
looking for that for all of
Yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. But here's a question which comes in the context of, acquiring specialized skills.
Mhm.
In order to acquire skills, I need to compare. For instance, when I'm learning to become a doctor or an athlete, I need to compare to certain standards or benchmarks.
Mhm.
How do I not let this pursuit of acquiring technical skills
Mhm.
affect me psychologically? How do I
Mhm.
not let this affect me psychologically? Yeah.
Mhm. Maybe what I'm saying is just words. I'm sorry, it may not really hit the spot,
Mm.
but I see when you identify with something versus when you don't, right? Like
Right.
again in my singing, obviously the teacher was way, way better than me, but other students were also better, which I would get to see. Soon my own daughter was better than me. I think there's a difference between noticing it and thinking, oh, that's so beautiful, and actually
Mm.
enjoying it and feeling that, why am I not like that? I just, I don't have an answer to how to not go there except to notice that you have gone there. And then that's really pointless.
Mm.
And maybe when you see that it's pointless, maybe it'll just drop away. And then again, you can enjoy the beauty of that musician or that person who is doing that so beautifully. But I know
Right.
it is difficult.
Yes, it's difficult. In fact, the questioner had given sort of two examples, either when you're acquiring the skills to become a doctor
Mm,
or in athletics. And of
mm,
course, these are interesting examples,
mm,
especially because one of them rests on competition.
mm.
You often measure your abilities as an athlete in
Yes.
comparison with others and so on.
Mm.
So how to do that and yet remain untouched by it at a fundamental level? I think
That's
it's an interesting question. Yeah.
and that's something that, because I'm not a sports person, I actually can't answer. But that is the one
Right.
area of
Right.
human endeavor where I think it is very hard to avoid, isn't it? You may know, Siddhartha, because you run, and how does that feel?
Yeah, no, it's subtle because, even if you are not competing with others, you sort of set your own benchmarks and they can considerably affect how you feel about yourself, whether you come close to the benchmarks you set or not. Anyway, it's a tricky question, but let me move on to another question,
Mm,
which is, and this is from a parent of a child who studied in a Krishnamurti school.
Hmm.
My daughter studied in a KFI school for 6 years, and the all-inclusive and participatory learning environment has helped her in many ways.
Hmm.
Yet the sense of self, of being somebody, remains strongly embedded.
Hmm.
How do you explain this sense of identity or individuality, which is so widely prevalent in the world at large?
She asking, how do I explain why it is still there in spite of a good education, something that,
Yes, I think
yeah.
judging from the first half of the statement, I think it's probably that. Yeah,
I think I alluded to this when I spoke that in our
right.
school also very much. I,
Yeah,
there are certain movements of human, of the mind, like fear, uh, and this comparison, which even if we say we are building a school environment without fear, without comparison, it it is very much part of the nature, human nature to do these things.
right,
I I wouldn't want, I think it's a different kind of violence to put an expectation on a graduate of our schools to say, so you must be free of this. Too much.
right.
It's really
Yeah,
too much. I think if they are open to the question, if that young student is open to the question, that's as good as we can hope. To realize that the question is so valuable,
right,
for me, that's all I would hope for. I don't look for an outcome. Then I would be like any other school looking for pass percentage or, how
right,
many toppers did we have. I don't I don't think we should put that
right.
in our students, right?
Yeah, yeah, except that we are measuring different things.
Hmm.
And well, here's another question, and this question brings in another key word, I feel, which is the
Hmm.
word excellence.
Hmm.
And it's a word that's intrigued me a lot because excellence, in the way we normally use it, has a fairly clear meaning. But
Hmm.
I think Krishnaji himself uses the word, and I
Hmm.
think there are different ways in which it resonates. So the question is this: how does one
Hmm.
find excellence in oneself?
Hmm.
How can this happen without comparison? And the
Hmm.
context is, well, themselves. So, for children, really.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure, but I can ask
Mm.
a question like this.
Yeah.
Could it be that excellence means I do something with a lot of attention and care without worrying too much about how it's going to look or how it's going to come out? So,
Right.
in a sense, it's the best I can do in some sense.
Yeah.
Uh, because otherwise, the definition of excellence is always according to some external standards, right? But
Right.
as I was saying earlier, some of those students of mine who have specific difficulties in specific aspects of learning, I would
Right.
judge some of their work excellent. I would say it also. It's excellent
Right.
because they just did it with so much energy and that attitude that they brought to that work,
Right.
right? So excellence, could it be defined like that? Then it makes it
Yeah.
easier for me to say that. I mean, if we always have to define excellence as the Nobel Prize winner or then it's a bit difficult.
Yeah. So if we link excellence with process
Mm.
engagement rather than with outcomes,
Yes,
then excellence takes on a different kind of quality to it,
yes,
right?
yes.
And maybe even what you were talking about, when there's learning together and it
Mm.
feels like one mind learning,
Yeah,
somehow that feels like a kind of excellence too, even if
yeah,
that's not the way we usually define the word.
yeah.
Excellence is too often identified with one result, I think,
Yes,
one person's achievements.
yes.
Anyway, okay, so here's a question which is more specific and related to the vertical classroom. and it's a longish question, but I'll read it out.
Mm.
I have found that the vertical classrooms, both in junior and middle school, have
Mm.
bred comparison. One example is when sometimes teachers tend to acknowledge the older children for group and collective work. A
Mhm.
perceptive younger child can then feel left out, jealous, inadequate.
Mm.
Is it possible for a teacher to be sensitive all the time in their language, expression, and thought, and to the consequences of their actions on children of different temperaments?
Mm.
And then she gives another example when teachers rely on the version of louder or older children reporting instances of conflict.
Mm.
And so one question is,
Mm.
you know, about how a teacher can be sensitive all the
Mm.
time in language, expression, and thought.
Mm.
And there is a sort of follow-up question, which
Mm.
is how are individual teachers to be sensitized to these
Mm.
kinds of nuances, even in Krishnamurti-inspired schools?
Yeah. As to the question of can a teacher be sensitive, I guess there's two ways to look at this. One is that you're constantly censoring what you say. I
Mm,
think that would be very difficult, right? I
mm,
mean, a
yeah,
lot of awareness building exercises end up being something like that. Like, don't say this, say that. Don't
right,
say, make it like a statement, make it like a question.
right,
Uh, and this kind of correcting one's language, it will fail. I don't think
yeah,
that's the point of it. So then to sensitize in the other way, which is that it just completely drops away. You're never going to say anything comparative. I think it just comes with um, reflection and realizing how dangerous it is. Maybe if it's hurt you a lot, you will just never do it.
mm,
And that's the kind of sensitivity that I would look for, in myself and in my colleagues.
yeah,
And in that sense, no one can sensitize another person for that.
right,
It is through our conversations and how vulnerable can I be to say
yeah,
off that, yeah, I compare, or I compare myself, or I like this child better than that one because he writes better. Some horrible things sometimes you have to be able to say and let it
right,
out and then see the danger of it. I think that's the kind of sensitivity I would like. And
right,
the earlier thing she mentioned, the question about
yeah,
vertical classrooms.
yeah,
So I actually I haven't taught in mixed age groups, but I've always thought that the one of the purposes of a mixed age group is to play play down the comparison, right? Because
right,
since the other one is older than me, it doesn't have a sting. So it's
right.
interesting to hear that it still does happen. So that's something I'm learning
Mm,
new. I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah. I think, as you said, it calls for a great deal of attention on the part of the teacher at all times, and that's not easy. But at the same time, it can't fall into uh, sort of certain
Yeah,
practiced sort of approaches to every situation,
yeah.
because then you lose the immediacy of the moment and of that relationship.
Mm.
In fact, this sort of leads me into, I hope we're not sidetracking, but a lot of teacher education has to do with practices, including what you will say and your manner in class and so on.
Mm.
And I've often felt that one of the dangers of that, though it may have some value in some situations, that one of the dangers of that is that you you're relying on memory, of relying on pattern rather than on attention in the moment,
Mm.
and that can be dangerous. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Uh, okay, here's a question which I think goes back to something we've covered, but I'll ask it anyway. As human beings, we need to evolve. and it becomes inevitable to compare us to someone as a yardstick. In such a situation, how to derive motivation from
The
within
same. I think
to
this is the
evolve?
same question.
All right. Was it had I asked this earlier, or
Same
was
one.
it was the same one? Okay, I'm
Same
sorry.
one.
Yeah.
Same.
Okay, yeah. Because this question of inevitability comes into this question. It becomes inevitable to compare us. And you'd in your talk, you'd
Mm.
spoken about how what is natural is not necessarily inevitable.
Yeah.
And I think that's a useful distinction to keep in mind.
Also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, here's a question from a parent. How do I, as a parent, equip my child when she comes across such comparison and deal with it in the right way, especially when the education system sort of breeds comparison?
Mhm. Yeah. Especially if a child comes home and reports that
Right,
this
yeah,
is,
yeah,
that must be a hard one. I
yeah,
don't know. I mean, you're in your affection and love for your child. I'm sure you will say the right thing. If, as long as you don't endorse that or amplify it or find a way to get your child to do better than in the next comparison, I think
right.
anything you say in your affection for your child will help. I think sometimes parents fall prey to the same. That's what happens. They also feel like,
Mm.
well, school is doing this and making my child feel bad, so then I have to try to correct that situation by making my child feel better. Mm.
Mm.
Or they come to one of our Krishnamurti schools and they say, like, I'm done with that. That also
Yeah.
happens.
In fact, as people who work with children, uh, we often want to address the situation as sort of quickly and effectively as possible, and a child is feeling bad. So we
Mm.
find ways of trying to assuage that.
Mm.
Whereas Krishnamurti seems to use your metaphor to come like a splash of cold water because he's asking questions that have nothing to do with making us feel better about
Mm.
ourselves or about anything.
Yeah.
But so again, as a teacher, how have how have you sort of dealt with this dichotomy? As a child who's troubled and you have a sense of what it's about
Mm.
and you want to help the child feel better, but at the same time you don't want to do it in a kind of uh, easy way,
Yes.
which just
Consolation.
addresses the same symptoms. Yeah. So how have
Yeah.
you
I mean,
dealt?
so this depends on age, obviously. And also,
Yeah.
if I look at the school day or the school week, there's
Yeah.
such a variety of things going on that there's no one particular activity that dominates the week.
Mm.
Like let's say reading and writing. If reading is difficult, the child is reading for a small percentage of the week or writing. The rest
Yeah.
of the day and the week are spent doing so many things that it doesn't overwhelm. It doesn't feel like this is something I'm not good at and I spent my whole week trying to do it.
Right.
The same for any activity, be it sports. It's a kind of a balanced curriculum, right? So at a younger age, I would hope that that reduces some of the pain. But
Right.
I know, in fact, for a fact, because children have shared that it troubles them still. In
Right.
that time, they feel bad.
Right.
I mean, all one can do is really hold that affection, not put up any other child, not play the. Every child has that affection from the teacher, that regard that is not contingent on them being good at something. It's like
Right.
an unconditional. It's just
Yeah.
a respect, not a respect. It's regard. Okay,
Regard. Mm.
so it really doesn't matter how good or bad you are at anything. So that you get. I think that is a
Yeah.
kind of relaxation for a child.
Yeah.
Some of the mistakes that I do fall into is I do fall into that consolation thing. I start looking for little things that I can praise, and it happens very unconsciously.
Yeah.
And I heard from a student, from a former student, that he was very aware of that, and he didn't like it. So he said that my teachers used to say, "Oh my God, this is so good, this is so good." It really bugged me. I think
Interesting.
children they are very aware of what
Yeah.
they are good at and what they're not good at. And
Mm.
if we are insincere in some way, uh, it actually bothers them. So maybe they're stronger than we think they are. Maybe we can give them good feedback and say, like, you could do this much better, certainly.
Right. Yeah.
But I remember my professor at university telling me he had two children, and he used to praise their drawing, the girl, a lot.
Yeah.
And one day she showed him two drawings and said, "I did this and my brother did that. Which one's
Mm.
better?" So he
Yeah.
pointed to hers and she said, "I knew it. That one is my brother's. It's not mine." I mean, she was like setting him up for, she knew, and she was trying to
Right.
show him that
Right.
you're not
Right.
telling me the
Yeah.
truth.
Right. Yeah.
Quite interesting.
Very interesting. Yeah. Now I have, maybe we have time for a couple more questions. And here's one. Many of us struggle to relate to, quote, attention or choiceless observation state, etc., that Krishnaji talks about extensively. So it's an idea for most of us. As a teacher, how do you convey or dialogue on this with students? Does this feel challenging and perhaps even false when one hasn't experienced, witnessed such things oneself, things like attention and so on, or that state? How do you navigate such conversations?
It's a very difficult question. I
Mm,
think that it's really for those teachers who have spoken with older students. It sounds to me like a dialogue one would have with older students.
mm,
I haven't had too many of those. I generally work in the middle school.
mm,
Um, I may be saying something very obvious, some kind of vulnerability.
mm,
There is no way that I'm not telling you, you do like this, you'll become like me. I have figured
mm.
it out. Obviously, I'm saying that I also suffer from this. But, what I would like to, if I do that more and more, that work with older students, I think what I'd like to bring is, look, this question or this statement is just fascinating. Will you look at
Right,
it with me? Huh?
right. Mm,
And yes, we've had older students say, "But you've been asking this for
mhm,
so many years and it hasn't happened for you."
mm,
If I am not dejected or overwhelmed by the passage of time, and like some kind of light hasn't gone off, some bulb hasn't, if I am not overwhelmed or pulled down by that feeling, there's no problem with that question. It's like, yeah, I'm
absolutely.
not. But it remains a very, very beautiful question. So,
Yeah,
shall we look at it? I think
yeah.
sometimes we get the time, the weight of time that, oh, I've been at it for so long. That is the problem.
No, I think you'd also spoken about how these schools are places of learning for teachers.
Very
So
much.
if we see ourselves as learners who are, struggling with many of the same things that children are struggling with,
Yeah.
and these questions are as resonant for us as for anybody. And if one comes into it with that quality, as you were saying,
Mm.
then it's not conflictual. And I think maybe the last question, and it's sort of related to this, and this is a
Mm.
question I would like to ask you, which is, towards towards the end of your talk, you were speaking about the what the teachers are concerned with. What's the larger concern we might have as teachers, which brings
Yes.
us into this? And it may have to do with the state of the world and seeing the kind of global implications of, things like comparison and so on and so forth.
Mm.
Now, I was just wondering, as a teacher, and you've been a teacher for so many years, has your sense of purpose changed over the years? I mean, do you feel that when you started teaching, you had certain kinds of reasons for doing it, but over
Mm.
time that's changed? Or did you have a certain kind of mission-like clarity at the outset? I'm just curious.
For me personally, I didn't have that mission-like clarity.
Mm,
I think it so happened that I was temperamentally suited to the job also.
mm,
So I just enjoyed being with children. I enjoy teaching. I might have taught at any school for that matter and been quite happy. But I
mm,
came upon Krishnamurti and Krishnamurti schools, and I learned and grew in that space.
mm.
And so today so I didn't come to the schools with that mission.
Yeah,
I just came because I loved teaching. But I have grown, not a mission, but an understanding that yes, these questions are precious. I will hold them in this space. I will share them from where I'm standing.
right,
Uh, Maybe it won't be taken up, or some will take it up, some won't. I don't need to
right.
feel disheartened about that. And somebody was recently telling me that it may take 1,000 years, so don't expect anything in your lifetime. So
Mm.
that was quite a relief to hear that. It's like, okay.
Yeah, 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 that's so interesting. Yeah, thank you. Well, I think, well, we have a couple of minutes more, or 3 minutes more, I see. I don't really see any other questions. There are a few other comments which are related to what you had said, but I won't repeat them. Well, okay, since the question has come up, it's a very, very specific question, but I'll ask it anyway since it's been typed here. Uh, and it has to do with this no detention policy that
Mhm.
is there in some places.
Mhm.
What is your opinion about this?
By no detention is meant you don't hold a child back, right?
That's how I understand it. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right. Yeah,
yeah.
no, I think it's a very good notion, but it really depends how the school holds it, right?
Right.
If it's no detention as a phrase that has to be followed, the
Yeah,
spirit of it is that we usually promote children based on academic performance. That is what
right,
promotion and detention are based on. Now,
right,
at our school, there are times when we feel that a child would be happier or more at ease in the younger group. And that
right,
has happened over the past 30 odd years, maybe about 10 times. And it has
right,
been a good decision. It is
right.
generally not for academic reasons. It is
Yeah,
generally for reasons of compatibility or
right.
emotional levels. You know, what
Yeah.
jokes does this child laugh at? Is she
Mm,
feeling like a fish out of water in this group?
mm,
So, no detention in the regular school system, it's kind of, it's okay, I guess, but it's like,
yeah,
promotion, detention, the whole thing is so problematic that I'm not able to celebrate
right.
just that one piece of it. But I guess
Yes.
it's good. Mm.
In fact, the word detention itself is so loaded.
Yeah,
And what you were describing, those 10 or so instances, I don't know if one would even want to call them detention. It's
not at
something
all.
else, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the child
yeah,
was much
yeah.
happier after that shift.
Right. Yeah. 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 So I think we'll stop at this point, Kamla. Thanks so very much for joining us today. It's been such
Thank
a
you.
wonderful presentation, and thank you to all the participants for being here and for many very stimulating questions. And do join us next time as well. We're likely to have the next webinar in March. So thanks again, Kamla.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye. Yeah.